Hello everyone, and welcome to a video I've created along with Michael Dunn on sacred activism. I'd like to introduce you to the Grand Commander of the Order of Temple of Solomon, Michael Henry Dunn. So as I said, today we're going to talk about sacred activism, but first, Michael, would you share with us just a little bit about the order?
I would be glad to. Thanks, Maya. The restoration of the original Order of the Knights Templar sounds like a sort of fantastic kind of notion. And the reasons for it are primarily to embody and manifest on the global stage the values of chivalry as they were contained and expressed within the original medieval order of the Order of the Temple of Solomon. The original name of the Templar Order in their earliest beginnings was the Poor Knights of Christ of the Temple of Solomon. And they then became known as the Templars. And what is not so well known about the medieval Order of the Templars is that they were actually the inheritors of a much older lineage that goes far back into history. And the Templars began in 1118 AD when, in the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem, 9 French knights came specifically with the mission of undertaking what we can call sacred archaeology beneath the Temple Mount, under the Temple of Solomon. At that time, the Dome of the Rock was in Christian hands. And so for 9 years, they undertook excavations beneath the Temple of Solomon. There's a lot of speculation and legend about, oh, there was some great treasure. Well, the treasure was, in fact, sacred wisdom in scriptures that were preserved there, which all the evidence indicates was those were actually copies of what later, 1,000 years later, came down to us as the Gnostic Gospels that were found in the caves at Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so those earliest Templars were actually taught by Sufi masters, Muslim Sufi mystics, Sufism being the more mystical branch of Islam. Those Templars were taught by Sufi masters how to understand and to practice the sacred truths they found in those scriptures. And if you go further back in history, the Sufi lineage is actually pre-Islamic and is the surviving wisdom in the Middle East of Pharaonic wisdom, and that is actually the same lineage as the Essenes, from which came Lord Jesus and, of course, Mary Magdalene. And so the Templars today strive to practice and embody those same teachings. And when you talk about chivalry and the the archetype of the knight in shining armor, upholding justice, defending those who cannot defend themselves, having respect for women, and upholding the equality and respect for women, and practicing sacred knowledge, direct communion with the divine. Now, all these images and archetypes in the Western world are really part of what you could call our cultural DNA. The knight in shining armor, the Holy Grail, the sacred quest, the Round Table, King Arthur. These are deeply embedded in our cultural DNA, really in sort of the air we breathe. And they are the repository in the West of the highest ideals of serving humanity and the divine. Now, there's other expressions in other cultures. We don't say that the code of chivalry is a unique Western possession. Actually, in historical fact, the code of chivalry was not a European phenomenon. It was something that the Templars were inspired by Arab chivalry. In fact, in the earliest years of the chivalric tradition, the troubadour network, the singers and storytellers, came up through the Iberian Peninsula, what is today Spain and Portugal, which was under Islam at the time. Those are where those earliest stories of chivalry come from. So the Templars today very much pay tribute to our debt to Arab chivalry and acknowledge the friendship that grew between the Saracens, most famously led by the great general Salah ad-Din, and the Templars. For example, Salah ad-Din and King Richard the Lionheart were opponents on the battlefield, but friends in chivalry. So the order was restored lineally, according to chivalric protocol, customary international law, essentially on the same basis by which the Knights of Malta, who are probably the best known other major order of chivalry in the world today, Knights of Malta, like the Templars, were also in what's called abeyance. For several hundred years, the Knights of Malta ceased to exist. And the Templar order was restored according to the same protocol by which the Knights of Malta, about 200 years ago, were also restored. And for myself, I came to this restoration because I was already engaged in sacred activism, pursuing the understanding of it, and that pursuing the practice of it. And that led me to some freelance journalism in Indonesia on a story having to do with financial corruption at high levels. And it was through that work that I met Prince Matthew of Thebes, who is the Grand Master of the restored Templar order. And our quest at that time was the establishment of a new and enforceable International Court of Human Rights, which is today known as the Sovereign Court of International Justice, or SCIJ, which is part of an intergovernmental organization called Ignita Veritas United. And so that led me to begin to work with and understand the restoration of the Templar order from the basis of sacred activism. I have my own meditation path for about the last 25 years. So I came to the Templar restoration and the sacred activism work of the Human Rights Project from a well-established path of my own in terms of seeking direct communion with the divine. So today, that is our primary focus, is teaching the timeless principles of chivalry, of sacred activism. And we're in a crucial time in the, well, not so much the planet's history. The planet will be fine with or without us, but in human history. And so that is probably the best summation I can give of a thumbnail sketch of the history of the order and the restoration. And yeah, so I hope that's helpful.
Oh, yes, that was beautifully done. And I don't want to forget it, and I might if I wait till the end. So I'm going to say now that Michael is currently writing a book, and it's on...
Right, well, it's called From the Gold to the Goddess, the true story of the restoration of chivalry and the return of the Knights Templar. And it tells the story of my coming to Indonesia, meeting Prince Matthew. When I say from the gold to the goddess, the story on financial corruption that I was working on in Indonesia, the subject is known as the global collateral accounts, which has to do with vast troves of gold that were secured in various bunkers and tunnels throughout Indonesia and elsewhere in Southeast Asia by the Japanese at the end of World War II, subsequently discovered by the Allies, and was set to be part of the post-war financial reform and serve as a fund to help restore the war-torn world and to be the basis for humanitarian projects. So what we will just refer to as a corrupt elite financial faction had other plans for that goal from the beginning. And that trove is rumored to contain what's referred to as the Saint Germain Fund, and also rumored to contain the lost treasure of the Knights Templar. Well, I'm not quite so sure that that is in fact part of it, but that from the gold to the goddess then leads to the sharing my understanding of the restoration of the divine feminine in the world today, which is really restoring an essential aspect of our souls to balance with the sacred masculine. Those elements are within each one of us, and part of spiritual evolution, in my understanding, is about seeking the balance within each soul. And on the macrocosmic level, you know, the planet has been very out of balance with what we would call the degenerate masculine principle of exploitation and domination, creating disaster on the planet, and that a restoration of the feminine principle to balance in the nurturing, receptive, intuitive, compassionate aspects of the soul that needs to be expressed on the global level, or we're toast, we're done. Things are pretty grim. So like I said, the book is it tells that story, it tells my meeting with Prince Matthew. It's designed to be readable, entertaining, informative, and inspiring, and I hope it's all those things.
Well, I've already read a few chapters, and I can tell you it definitely is what they call a page turner.
Oh, good. Good. So
absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
So when is it going to be published, Michael?
Well, I'm on chapter 25 of a projected 30 chapters, and my intention is to publish it as soon as possible. I anticipate finishing the book before the end of March, and it's going to be rushed into print.
Great.
And so it should be available in April.
So it'll be on Amazon and places like that.
Right, and actually you can read excerpts of it now on Facebook if you go to the Order's Facebook page, which is the Sovereign Magistral Order of the Temple of Solomon. I have shared excerpts from the book, which you can find on that page.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you so much for that. That's just, I can hardly wait to read the whole book. So now, let's look at, and you addressed it to an extent already, but let's go into it a little more. I'm interested in seeing how the ancient order, maybe I shouldn't call it ancient, but the older order addressed activism. That's what we call that now. They probably didn't have a word for that then. And how the order is now addressing it as sacred activism.
Okay. Well, I'd like to share with you some passages from a wonderful book, which is called Saracen Chivalry by Sha'Maia-NEAAF Khan. In fact, I'll just show the book right here.
Oh, yes, I love him.
Yeah. Sha'Maia-NEAAF Khan is the grandson, I believe that's correct, of Hazrat Khan, who is the revered founder of the Sufi Order International in the West. And this is a wonderful expression, this book, of the timeless values of chivalry, and it is from an Islamic perspective. It tells the story, these values of chivalry in a Saracen context are told by Sha'Maia through the storytelling device of a dying queen whose husband was a Templar. This is a Saracen queen whose husband was a Templar, and these are messages addressed to her two sons, who therefore embody the heritage of both the West, of the Christian West, and of Islam. And the distillation of the sacred values of chivalry and passing these on to her sons so that they can understand the what we might call the interfaith timeless truths of chivalry as has been inherited in their family. It's who they are. And it is actually who we are in the West, certainly who the Templars are. And so I'd just like to share a passage or two about this, answering your question, Maya, about, okay, how do the timeless values of chivalry translate today, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is from chapter 8 in Pierzia's book. And I'll just read it for you. When corruption and tyranny took hold in the institutions of state, the followers of chivalry's straight path became, like the companions of the cave, rebels and dissenters. Their principles were not negotiable, nor could their allegiance be compelled by the powers of the day, for it belonged indelibly to the power that is forever. Though chivalry is, in essence, a sign of the primordial nature of every woman and man, it is also an art of life that grows in depth and subtlety with guidance and practice. Right guidance is necessary for the questing pilgrim. Even Moses the prophet sought guidance, asking it of Khizr. Let me read just another passage here. The sword is a clear symbol of uprightness, keenness, and brilliance. No weapon is as beautiful or as dangerous. A naked sword commands attention. The knightess, this is speaking of a woman of chivalry, the knightess must ever act with the greatest precision and care, and the sword is the sign of vigilance. So I really heartily recommend this wonderful book to people who are interested in, and particularly in the heritage of the Templar Saracen friendship.
What's the name of the book again, Michael? Could you hold it up so we can see it again?
Right, yes, once again, this is Saracen Chivalry by Sha'Maia-NEAAF Khan.
Thank you.
Is the head of the Sufi order, the international Sufi order in the West. So let's see, there was one last thing. Yep. I'm sorry, I forgot the last thing I was saying. We'll find it.
So that's the divine principle behind it all. And the Templars in the original Templars, of course, they had definitely had chivalry. There was no question about that. And the whole idea was taking care of the poor and defending them and all of that. But of course, it was a medieval time, and there was a much different landscape in regard to what was going on then and how anyone thought about it. You know, my inner Sophie Rise always said to me, do not judge people outside of their time frame. You know, look at it from the environment that they're in and what they're dealing with and what their brain cells were, you know, receiving at birth and growing up. So we need to look at it from that perspective. So if we look at the Templars, therefore, in that perspective, I think they did a darn good job because they had a lot of chaos. They had a lot of old, crusty traditions that were really weighted down. I'm not talking about the Templars themselves, but the environment in which they lived. They had hardships, terrific hardships in that time. And it was the rule of thumb for people to conquer one another and murder their siblings so they could gain the throne. It's like, oh, well, he did it again. No big deal. You know, that kind of thing was going on constantly. And for the Templars to rise up and to take any kind of stand at all against that, I think was really quite exemplary. So looking at it from that perspective, though, we also see that now, even though a lot of things are going sideways right now, we do have a basis. We have accumulated a consciousness that is really more advanced than it was there in general. And so now the Templars step forward in this new state of mind and environment. And so now they're looking at sacred activism in a more enlightened way. I'm just going to put it that way.
Mm.
So what would that enlightened way be now?
Well, obviously, I mean, we're not carrying around, broadswords and battle axes, and the sacred activism, which for the Templars as warrior monks, that was the unique thing about the Templars. They were the first example in the West of a monastic order. They were a classic monastic order. And Saint Bernard de Clairvaux helped compose the temple rule, which governed that monastic life, which was based on the Cistercian rule. But they were warriors, and this was a controversial innovation at the time, which Saint Bernard's prestige helped win them approval for. So, that how that translates today, as today you might say we are info warriors. I don't like the phrase info war, but yeah, but I would say, warriors of peace, information warfare, essentially human rights, and the quest to cut through the chaos of confusion, particularly in the media today, with what we might call the sword of truth. One hears about fake news, accusations of, oh, you guys over there are issuing fake news. It's no, you guys are the fake news, and there's so much confusion between that. It's easy for most people to just go, what's real anymore? There's all these accusations flying back and forth. I'm just going to continue to struggle with my 2 or 3 jobs that I have to work to be able to, keep up on my credit card payments and feed my family. That's kind of what the design, and it is a deliberate design, and there's lots of evidence for that, is to, to keep the people confused and utterly stressed out, so that they do not resist the systems of domination and exploitation, which have been put in place over the last 200 or 300 years. So, it is the stated, explicit mission of the Templars to cut through with the sword of truth to objective, evidence-based facts that we can all see and agree upon, and to apply the principles of the rule of law, of ruling on the evidence from the highest level of judicial integrity, on these systematic violations of human rights law, by which what we will call the corrupt financial elite do their daily business of exploiting the planet and humanity. And so this is why I read this passage about when the institutions of state become corrupt and tyrannous. It is the obligation of the followers of chivalry to become dissenters and rebels. Now, we strictly advocate nonviolence, except in self-defense. This is true even of Mahatma Gandhi, the great exemplar, that in self-defense, there does become occasions on which lethal self-defense is necessary. There's many, many examples in Scripture that describe and explain this. And of course, the Templar Order does welcome and honor veterans of military service and law enforcement officers, who do, of course, need to use lethal force in the course of their work. But the order itself is explicitly nonviolent and engaged in human rights work. And what you mentioned before, Maya, about how, well, back in medieval times, there was this lower consciousness, and brother would kill brother to succeed to kingdoms and things like that. There's actually a historical incident after a battle between the Saracens and the Christian forces near Jerusalem, with General Salah ad-Din leading the Saracen forces. And the Saracens were victorious on this one occasion, and several of the Christian kings who led the Christian army were brought into his tent. Now, there had been a treaty signed between the Saracens and the Crusaders, and this one Christian king had said, well, I can see it's going to be greatly to my advantage, politically and in terms of profit, to just violate this treaty and go attack this town that controls a trade route. So that's what I'm going to do. It had nothing to do with defending the Holy Land or the access of pilgrims to the holy places, which was ostensibly the primary reason for the crusade. This guy just said, well, I know we've sworn an oath, but I'm just going to violate it because I want to go take this trade route. And so he started a war in which thousands were killed. And so now, after the battle, he's there in Salah ad-Din's tent, a captive. And Salah ad-Din says to him, why did you violate your oath? Why did you break this treaty and attack us? And the French Christian king says, essentially he says, oh, come on. It's the common practice of kings to do this sort of thing. Right? Just as you were saying, and without another word, Salah ad-Din drew his sword and beheaded him on the spot in front of everyone and said, such a vile violation of the sacred principles of chivalry by a king who is anointed by God must be utterly rejected and punished at once. Now, by the standards of the day, okay, that's pretty gruesome from our point of view. But is it less gruesome in the electric chair? Is it less gruesome, to decapitate women and children with drones as collateral damage? I don't know. But as an example of a pretty, brutal demonstration, but nevertheless, on the face of it, saying a standard of justice and truth must be upheld, and to have the highest in the land to whom we look for integrity, to whom we look for how things are and how things should be done, to just blatantly reject any kind of standard of integrity. And of course, we see this happening right now.
All over the place. And the United States is basically the biggest one that's...
Yeah, well, the thing about the U.S., I'm an American and I'm a patriot. And my father served in the Marines, and my great-grandfather served at Gettysburg. And I believe in the principles upon which this country was founded.
I do too, yeah.
Yeah, and the idea of the U.S. as the exceptional nation because we uphold these highest standards of democracy and the last best hope of earth, as Lincoln said, and all that. Well, that, basically for a very long time, for most of the 20th century, and certainly today, that exceptional rationalization has been a fig leaf over creeping fascist aggression.
Yes.
The American people just hold those ideals in their hearts as who we believe America to be, who we believe ourselves as Americans to be. What's happening now is the fig leaf has been dropped. It's just naked, unabashed, fascist aggression, deception, lies, America first. The rest of you can go to Hades in a handbasket, and we're just going to do whatever it takes to, benefit us. So the loss of even the illusion of America in the world as that place that is upholding democracy and human rights, that's a great loss. And personally, as an American and a Templar, I want to see that restored.
Yes. Yes. Well, from the Thothic perspective, from my Inner Planes mentor, as tragic as it is, and it didn't have to come down this way. It could have been a much more graceful situation, but because we forced it in the corner, so to speak, and as painful as it is, he calls it that the stumbling fool must do his dance before balance can be restored. So we brought it to this capsize. And now that's what the Trump thing is about. And it's capsized and it's just going like this, all over the place. But in doing so, everybody is just aghast, just about everybody, and it's so horrendous that it allows that to come out of the shadows, because they were doing their stuff in the shadows. And we had to go, we went about our business, like you said, so full of having to make living and do this and do that. But now it's getting so horrendous. Even those people are going, wait a minute, and they're having to do something. So that's the hope I have now, is that it will simply just self-destruct and reveal what the power is that we had all along that we didn't realize we had as the people.
Yes, very much. And just, I want to touch briefly on the question of politics and the Templar Order, because we welcome people of all political convictions from different corners of the political spectrum, be it right or left, Republican, Democrat. And in my own sense of what's unfolding, when I look at the core principles of chivalry, these principles occupy what we would call the political center. If you just simply take human rights and defending sacred knowledge, there are certain political ramifications of this. But Prince Matthew, the Grand Master of the Order, has created a wonderful image, a chart that shows the Templar cross at the center, and then the political disagreements. Okay, smaller government, which is over on the right with the Republican. A greater safety net over on the left with Democrats. And then as you go further and further to the extreme right, you get fascism. At the extreme left, you get the example of Soviet totalitarianism, and that the values of chivalry hold the political center, the moral political center. In my own sense of what's going on now, when I spoke of the fig leaf of American righteousness over the reality of fascist aggression, had Hillary Clinton been elected, it would have been simply a continuation of that status quo. And everybody would have been thrilled that we had a woman president, and there would have been the continuing sort of facade over that fascist aggression. And personally, I would like to have seen Senator Sanders be given the nomination that, in fact, I believe was his by right. And that, I think, played into the election of Trump in a very big way. The fact that the Sanders supporters were alienated. And then there's the voter suppression laws by the GOP that, and obviously he achieved a very narrow electoral college victory and the loss of the popular vote. But as you say, what has happened as a result is that this man is so completely unpredictable and has so little experience in the actual, levers of government, that there is this chaos in place, and a lot of things that needed to be exposed are being exposed that that none of us can abide or accept or stomach, and that's why there's this huge galvanization in this country of action at the local level, of what I would call the assertion of our essential values of democracy and free enterprise and human rights. It's a big, it's a big deal. It's going to be a rocky ride.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to continue with all of that, but I'm trying to keep this a little shorter than longer so people can listen to it. So I'm going to go on to the next step. And first of all, I'm going to say for myself, as many of you already know, but some listening to this may not, I was living in Kauai and continuing, of course, with my 50-some years of spiritual work through the New Earth Inner Academy, which is under my nonprofit church, Spirit Heart Sanctuary. And through a series of events, Michael Henry Dunn came to my attention along with the Templars. One thing led to another very quickly, and I was accepted as a dame, which is a Templar female, and have my own priory now, the Priory of the White Stone. And this was concurrent with my move back to Crestone, Colorado, from which I had been absent for 17 years. So it was quite a big thing for me all the way around, a very wonderful experience. And I can't help but feel that both the move and my entry into the Templar Order was a package deal, you might say, from the universe, gift from the universe. So that said, I went to my Inner Planes mentor, Thoth Hara, on what his take on sacred activism is. Now, from the Thothic perspective, unless I really try to bring it down and say, well, Thoth, I want to know about this and this and this, he's going to give me a big overview, not the kinds of things that we've been talking about that are so important, but sort of the envelope that encompasses all of that. And so this basically rather short message does that. It's not crystal clear in a way because there's a lot of symbolism involved in it, but I think it does make a statement that we can all take to heart, and perhaps we'd like to discuss it a little bit after I read it. So here we go. From the Thothic perspective, sacred activism comes from the being's core gnosis, aligned with universal law. It is anchored not in the personality, but in the soul. It is the act of living the sacred, the feeding and nurturing of the divine spark within. From the attention given to the inner divine, the being becomes alert to and resonant with the needs of others, for seen in the other is self. Once that light is turned on and the bond is realized deep in the core, higher guidance prevails. The soul dips into the well of the being's frame of reference, and all experience is viewed, felt, and understood from the vantage point of harmonic resonance. A deepening fire begins to burn, and the being must act, must take up the gauntlet for harmony and justice. Now comes the crucial moment. Action must come from that deep place of universal order. It must arise from the seabed of the great ocean of resolve that is pulled by the tides of the monad, the greater solar force. If this calling is not yet signaled in the being, only stillness is to be found therein. This sacred pause is awaiting the celestial chords to surge out of the heart like waves on the sea. One must realize this stillness as the sacred before the act. When the signal comes, it is likened unto a voice in the wilderness, for it plumbs the depths of the being, seeking anchor where there is no safe harbor. The being must rise up and embrace the signal and bring it home. The fire that burns within engenders resolve to follow the sacred through the chaos and yet keep the signal pure, the intent mindful, and the being alert. There is no other roadmap but that divine fire guiding the being onward. Thus, in this way, the sacred action is taken. It may be a small thing in the eyes of the world, yet a mountain pushes it up out of the morass and calls to the hearts of the masses. Unseen for what it is, it does not threaten the sleeper, but sweetly calls that slumbering being to the warmth of the fire within the soul. Yet there is also the great sword of truth. It cuts into the ages of stagnation, the thrusting of illusion and fear. For those who will not come to the smoldering hearth, they shall feel the pain of their own choosing, until the sword of the soul opens them up to the light of day. This sword no human hand wields. It is tempered within the very hearts of the blind and deaf. The sacred does not act against, but for. It creates an environment for those who strive to deny, a place where no denial is possible.
That's so beautiful, Maya. I read that again this morning. I have a copy of it in front of me before we began, just to touch those depths again. Thank you for bringing that to us.
You're welcome. Do you have anything you'd like to comment on about it or ask? Maybe you don't. That's okay.
You know, as I was being with it again this morning, two particular passages really touched me. This passage, that when the signal comes, you know, when Andrew Harvey, who is one of the great teachers of sacred activism in the world today, and I've had a chance to get to know Andrew on a couple of different occasions, he talks about how when you are seeking, you know, what is your own particular, what we would call sacred quest of sacred activism, and the Templar Order exists to support the sacred quests of the men and women who choose to become Templars, that in seeking that particular cause that is yours, he said, Andrew Harvey said, find that cause or tragedy or injustice in the world which breaks your heart. Find that heartbreak, because that heartbreak actually is the fire that, you know, will fuel ongoingly your sacred quest and your work in the world. And it doesn't need to be some vast project. You know, it can be, you know, if you are drawn to the plight of the abuse of animals, or if it be an environmental cause, or, you know, it can be any number. And it's best to act locally, you know, just immediately what's in front of you, what has the divine placed in front of each one of us. That's where we can start. So when you say that when the signal comes, it is like unto a voice in the wilderness, for it plumbs the depths of the being, seeking anchor where there is no safe harbor. The being must rise up and embrace the signal and bring it home. And I'll go, the fire that burns within engenders resolve to follow the sacred through the chaos and yet keep the signal pure, the intent mindful, and the being alert. There is no other roadmap but that divine fire guiding the being onward. Now that is where meditation comes in, however one's practice follows, whatever path you come to. Sacred activism requires that we anchor on a daily basis within that connection to the divine so that we can act from that. And so, as your words here are, thus in this way the sacred action is taken. It may be a small thing in the eyes of the world, yet a mountain pushes it up out of the morass and calls to the hearts of the masses. And this is where, to me, a potentially very powerful impact of the Templar Restoration comes into play. Because, you know, calling to the heart of the masses, there is something deep within us that responds to these high ideals. And there is something so audacious and fantastic about the idea of restoring the original order of the Templars, that what I have discovered is that when people hear about it, they check us out, they see the depth of the restoration, the, you know, so many aspects of the legacy of the Templars being brought forward, and the depth of the legitimacy and the geopolitical impact and the very careful structuring of the intergovernmental organization and of the Human Rights Court and the, you know, high-level diplomacy and international law and all of it that has been brought to it. And that this is a modern expression of the lineal restoration of the original order of the Knights Templar. People are speechless. They just go, is this for real? You guys have really done this? You know? Well, I would say, you know, the Templar motto is non nobis domine sed tuo da gloriam. Well, no, you know, it wasn't us. We're doing the best we can, you know, not to get in the way. And but I would say as a divine move in the world, I mean, there are many other, of course, beautiful expressions of the values of chivalry and beautiful human rights organizations that we ally with and admire, and that, you know, the Templars have our role. There is the role that we've been given to play. So that audacity is very inspiring, I think, and the story of it, of, you know, the power of storytelling, which was the internet of the day for the Templars in medieval times, was the troubadour network throughout Europe, and they seeded the Arthurian tales and the Holy Grail and the Lady Fair and the Sacred Quest, all these things that have come down to us. You know, 100 commercials on TV per day use these archetypes because they know they tug at us, because it's part of us. You know, that was how the Templars moved the masses then. And so the story of the restoration of the Templars is itself, I think, as you say here, a very powerful way that even a small action, if done in the spirit of chivalry, is this mountain that pushes up out of the morass and calls to the hearts of the masses.
Yes, absolutely. I feel what you're saying there. It all comes together. And you're such a marvelous historian. I love history, but I'm not as adept at it as you are by any means. But it really speaks to my heart when you bring these things. Because, you know, when I did read a lot, very young, I read histories and historical fiction and things of that nature, because it just called to me. Even the parts of it that were not as pleasant as other parts, I saw it as a story of humanity where we are now, you know. So anyway, going off on that, but I just love it when you talk history.
Well, I love it. It's from the time I was a little kid, you know, these were the stories that moved me. And when I was a teenager, I had the opportunity to, the high school I went to had a wonderful theater department, and there were some remarkably talented kids, several of whom have gone on to win Tonys and Oscars and Emmys. And I got to actually play Don Quixote, Cervantes, in Man of La Mancha, opposite the wonderful Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio as Aldonza, who later played that role on Broadway. So that, you know, legend and that ideal were part of me from, you know, the time I was 13 or 14.
Yes. Wow. Well, there's so much more that could be said, but we're coming up to the hour, so I think we're going to conclude here. But thank you so much, Michael Henry Dunn, for participating in this with me.
Yeah, you're so welcome, Maya. It's a pleasure, and thank you for the beauty and power of the work that you've done, and that it's come through you and the Priory of the Whitestone. We are so honored to have you as part of our Templar family.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to be putting the links below this video, wherever I'm putting this video, to Michael's, well, the whole Order of the Templars, anything Michael, and also to my work as well. So you'll have links there to follow if you care to do so. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and happy trails, as I like to say.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.